I will be talking a little bit about keeping up with AI. I think this is a hot topic. I think at the moment, I think we all have seen that there's been an AI boom in the last couple of years. There is mounting pressure to kind of be at the forefront of innovation and be kind of putting out all of these great AI experiences. But what does that really mean in UX? And how do we kind of make sure that we are keeping ahead while still staying true to our practice, staying true to UX methodologies, and keeping users at the forefront of our work. So this is a little bit of what I'll be talking about today. Okay. So a little bit about what I'll be talking about. I'll introduce myself a little bit so you know why I'm even talking about this. I'll give an introduction, go over some of the objectives of my talk, and then we'll kind of get right into the meat of it. Okay, so a little bit about me. I am a former academic turned UX researcher. I think it seems like a really popular career pivot. I think 4 or 5 people I know in my life are people who made that career pivot. So I have the privilege of having experience in qualitative and quantitative research. In UX, I have also had the privilege of working across a lot of different industries. I've worked in industrial design, mental health, and more recently in the finance industry. And I think having experience working across a variety of industries has helped me be a little bit more flexible and adaptable as a UX researcher. And I think has given me a lot more insight into kind of the way that different industries work and has allowed me to kind of harness that knowledge in my current role. And why am I talking about AI? Well, I think as a researcher, I've mainly worked in spaces where I am either the only researcher or I have a couple supports, but it's mainly kind of me scaling and strategizing about frameworks and research. So I have spent a lot of time thinking about this and aggregating data on kind of how we do research on AI, what that looks like in UX. And I have also spoken to a lot of folks who do a lot of AI work. So I think I had all this data and I figured why not kind of share it with the world, as I think there isn't a lot of precedent about this right now. Okay, great. Okay, part of putting this presentation together, I had a lot of fun finding like interesting AI pictures that are kind of weird to look at. And so you'll see a lot of those pictures throughout this presentation because they gave me a lot of pleasure. Okay, so as we know, AI is still kind of an emerging industry. And I think there are some conversations happening about UX for AI, but there isn't a lot of precedent on how we should be formally kind of attacking this issue and how to integrate AI into your research practice. And I think this is important whether you're currently working to kind of scale UX research up at a smaller company or you're at a company with a more established practice, whether you're a designer, a researcher, a product manager or owner, kind of figuring out the best ways to integrate and leverage AI can be tricky. And I think it's something that I have tried to distill in this talk, and I've tried to talk a little bit about the main segments that I think are important, but there are going to be a lot of things I missed. But I hope that I can touch on the main things that I think are of interest. Okay, so objectives. I think with AI innovation kind of speeding up, there's so much competition between industries and trying to keep up. And I think there's a lot of pressure on product teams to kind of be putting out these AI experiences without making sure we're going through the right vetting processes. AI should not be exempt from good research. It shouldn't be exempt from UX design, and it should be seen as an even higher priority because I think AI is a high risk, high reward system, and so we should be making sure we're putting enough time devoted into some of this front end work. So I'll kind of go over the basics. How do we make sure we're incorporating AI into our practice? And what does that really look like? How can we make sure we're keeping up while not kind of driving ourselves insane, trying to stay on top of every single AI feature that's been, put out? And how do we develop a strategy? How do we create effective strategies with AI in mind that kind of still incorporate the larger business goals and objectives that you're working within, and also how you are looking to contain it within your UX practice? and also managing stakeholders, which I think is the overarching part of this. That is like the key piece to making sure that we can get what we want from these AI experiences. So these topics, I think I kind of pulled them together from my own experiences of what I wish I had known before I started doing research with AI. So I hope it can be helpful in that capacity. Okay, great. Okay, so I'll go over some of the basics first. So, as a researcher, it's no surprise that I think research comes first, but I think it's easy to think of AI as a catch all solution. I think any of you who work, especially in more tech focused companies, AI is kind of starting to be that thing where, like, why don't we solve this with AI? And why don't we use AI to do this? And why don't we just build a chatbot? Not every problem requires an AI solution, and making sure that you are critically thinking about the problem space, your users, the pain points, your goals, and before you even get to AI and what that should look like. And making sure that if you do go with AI solutions, heavily validating with users. And I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. Um, okay, creating effective AI roadmaps. So, as it's lucky we're doing this early on in the year, but as roadmaps are kind of built out for the year, for the quarter, consider what products or features might benefit from AI. And I think part of that comes from understanding what AI use cases exist out there, what features are being put out. I think this is probably more relevant if you're a product manager, but even as a UXer, I think being able to think about that helps you kind of scope out projects and think about what features could map onto your product needs based on research that you've already done. And also something that I have done in the past is working with your team to do AI centered sprints to kind of get them started to think about AI solutions. I think something that I found is it's not really intuitive to how I think. I'm not always thinking, well, AI can solve this problem. But if you're kind of immersing yourself in it a little bit more and working with your team to kind of get the creative juices flowing um, on how AI can be utilized, I think that's where you find the maximum impact. And also making sure to keep up to date on how your competitors are using AI. So I wish there might be some kind of competitive analysis distribute newsletter about this, but I think keeping up to date as much as you can on AI trends for various features, I think within your industry, but also across other industries. I think we focus a lot on what tech is doing or what we're doing within our own industry, but there's a lot of really interesting features being built out by other industries that we can learn from. And I think kind of keeping yourself siloed into just what other people in healthcare are doing or other people in finance are doing isn't necessarily serving your needs. So I think making sure that you are kind of taking an agnostic approach in that sense. Okay, and then I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention ethics in AI. Obviously, I think I could give an entire talk about ethics in AI. Maybe not me. Someone else should give an entire talk about ethics in AI, and I think there's an entire panel who talks about this. But it's important to make sure you're embedding ethical principles into the work that you're doing. And I think there are three main principles to make sure that you're considering to make sure that the ethical implications of your AI aren't putting anyone at risk, aren't making people uncomfortable, setting yourselves up for lawsuits, things like that. Um, so transparency is number one. Making sure that your users know what you're using AI for and what the AI does is really important. You don't want to be jump scaring your users with like, surprise, this was an AI feature and you had no idea. That's not a great way to build trust with your users. So making sure that they have all of that knowledge. And also privacy. So data and how data is being used is also another hot topic, but making sure that you're telling your users how you're going to be using their data and what's going to happen with the data, how it's being stored, things like that is incredibly important and invaluable. And lastly, neutrality. So obviously, hopefully none of us are setting out to create experiences that would be discriminatory or biased in any way, but making sure you're striving towards creating experiences that aren't biased or discriminatory and making sure you're considering that when testing things out and are considering that in the product roadmap. Okay, So now I'll move on to talk a little bit about developing a strategy. Okay, so where do we start? I think this is a loaded question. I've tried to once again distill it into some easy key points, and I've used a lot of like resources to kind of put this together. But I think the number one, and I think GitLab has a great resource on this that I pulled a lot of data from. But where to start? So understanding the problem space. What do you know about the problem space? I think this is good to do some self-reflection. You know, when if you're a UXer, a request comes in, or if you're a PM, thinking about, you know, what features make sense for your understanding of the users in the problem space. And this will kind of determine what research you pursue. And I'll talk a little bit more about what kind of research and how to choose that based on your understanding. And then you go into user research. So make sure you take the time to collect data from users, whether it's, you know, more generative research such as user interviews, or you are looking for more feedback on solutions. But making sure that you do get some touch point with your users will be invaluable. And validation and iteration, a great part of the UX process. And obviously, in an ideal world, we would do this with every product, but that's not necessarily always the case. So making sure that you are throughout the design process, there's a continuous feedback loop with your users. And, you know, every time you're creating new concepts, you have new pages, you want to be going back to your users saying, hey, does this make sense? Does this look like what you want, what you had envisioned? And then continuing research. I think it's important in the long run to make sure that you're setting up with your stakeholders that this is going to be long-term research. You know, as soon as you're kind of finished with the product per se and you've handed it off to development, the research doesn't stop there. You know, after the project goes live, you still want to do, you know, what you want to be collecting some metrics on user satisfaction, seeing how people are responding to the product, and then continue to do research throughout as things change, as you want to add new features and functionality. So making sure that you're setting your stakeholders up with that expectation. Okay, so deciding on what kind of research to pursue. So when you don't really know the problem space, you want to do user interviews. So this is in the sense where, you know, someone says, "Hey, we want to come in and create a AI recommendation feature for this group." And it's for a particular application within a suite of applications you've never worked with. This is a good time to take the time to interview your users, to kind of understand their pain points, their goals, understand who they are. You want to take the opportunity to create personas, so representations of your users that you can kind of refer back to throughout, you know, obviously, since you want to be doing continuous research, having kind of a living artifact that represents your users' pain points, needs, goals will be helpful to kind of refer back to throughout the research process. And then work with your users to map out their current journeys and also what are their ideal solution states. So, what in an ideal world do you want this to look like? And that might not necessarily be functionally possible, but it gives you something to strive for and something that you want to get as close to as you can. Okay. And when you do know the problem space, and this is probably more likely, I think, as a researcher or a designer or a PM at your company, chances are you've worked with these users a lot. You have specific subject matter expertise in that area. You know the current pain points and goals. You might not know it for this specific use case, and that's important to evaluate, but you want to start with the problem. So look at the problem space, evaluate your own understanding, do some self reflection. How much do you really know? Make sure you go through the research that you already have. So, assuming you've done research on these users and you've spoken with them and you've had touch points with them, review all that data to see like what are the gaps, what else do you want to know, what do you need to validate, and then start thinking about solutions, which you can then go back and validate with your users. Okay, and an important point to also mention is to make sure that you understand what kind of mistakes your feature can have and the consequences. So I think a lot of us are seeing these stories come out about, you know, an AI feature gone wrong. I think there was one of my coworkers actually was telling us this. I think it was Air Canada, who they had like a chatbot, and one of the users or one of the people who was supposed to go on a flight canceled their flight through advice from the chatbot because the chatbot told them, oh, they could get a full refund. And they were like, great. So they canceled their flight. And then Air Canada said, hey, this is not our policy, and tried to argue that the chatbot is a separate entity from them, and therefore they're not responsible for the responses from their chatbot. And of course, the court ruled that that didn't make any sense because they created the chatbot and they should have thought about this and thought about their own policies. So make sure to consider examples we've seen in the media of AI gone wrong and the potential impact, and make sure you have kind of a good understanding of that and you do a lot of critical thinking and research and testing to make sure that that doesn't happen, because at the end of the day, whatever AI feature you create is an extension of your company. So whether or not you want to argue it's not, it is. So okay, and then finally, to talk a little bit about managing stakeholders, my favorite topic. Okay, so when a stakeholder approaches you, you might have two situations. One where they want to build an AI experience or they want to build an AI solution. So, what's kind of the difference here? I think an AI experience might be, I think an example I saw recently was like Netflix has the recommendations feature versus an AI solution where you might have like an AI chatbot or something. So make sure that when you get approached with an AI request, you start by asking the right questions. What do they want to build? Why do they want to build it? Where did they get their data that's informing them that this is a good solution or a good experience, or what are they looking to accomplish? I think this is important ahead of any project, but I think especially with AI projects where a lot of the priorities can get a little muddied, and a lot of the reasons we get approached for this stuff is because a competing company put this out, so therefore we have to put it out now. And so making sure that you're doing some critical evaluation of that space. Okay, and managing requests. So when you're talking with stakeholders, make sure that you're setting up reasonable expectations. We talked a little bit about, setting them up for a continuous research project, research process, and creating a research plan that's in line with your understanding of the space. So making sure that you're advocating for the kind of research that you need to be able to accomplish, the goal that you have, and that will deliver the best results, and emphasizing the need to kind of get it right versus putting out something that's partially ready just to kind of get it out in the world. I think this is a tension and a line that you'll often walk in a lot of spaces, but with AI, you really want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence, you're doing your research, you're working with your users to make sure you're putting out something great rather than putting out something mediocre that isn't going to fall flat. And then you lose trust from your customers and you lose trust, you lose satisfaction and things like that. And you'll have problems with retention. So making sure that you're keeping those priorities in mind. Okay, and lastly, why do we take a user-centered approach? So it feels like I should have started with this, but I'm going to end on this because I think knowing how to pitch this to stakeholders is a big priority and will kind of get you the results that you need. So why do we take a user-centered approach for AI? I think the same reason we do for other products. We better innovation. So having access to users and speaking with them can help you uncover new opportunities, new gaps in the space to create a unique experience. As much as I'd love to say you can just copy what the other company did, you want to make sure that you're in touch with your users and you can create something new and interesting rather than, redoing the same thing over and over. Neutrality, so testing your experience with users to make sure that you understand, what are the biases, any discriminatory issues, any large issues in, missing use cases or something, you'll know, and you can quickly resolve them. And finally, user satisfaction. So as we know, UX research leads to higher satisfaction, higher retention, and AI shouldn't be any different. I think the higher the stakes, the higher the reward, but also high visibility can lead to high downsides. So making sure that user experience is a top priority going into your AI experiences. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was my talk. I'll hand it back to you, Catherine.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That was really great. Lots of questions if you're up for it.
Yes.
So, first question, what do you use AI for the most?
Like in conducting research, I guess that I'm going to assume that's what they're talking about.
I would assume in terms of probably in your role, if you can talk, there's anything you can talk about, don't worry about that. But yeah, just in general in your role. Another question that's quite similar is around AI for iteration. How much context does AI get for iteration? So maybe it's at what stage do you use it for most? That's a way that I would interpret it.
Got it. Yeah. So as a researcher, I actually don't use AI very much. I think I have limitations for my company of how much I'm allowed to use it, which is why I don't. Yeah. But if I could, I know there are a lot of really great resources I think from a qualitative perspective, I know there are a lot of like summarization tools that are coming out and data annotation AI tools that are coming out. I always would prefer to kind of do that stuff on my own. But I think from a quantitative perspective, having AI to kind of run those numbers for you without having to do it manually, I think is a really big win. So that would be my take on that.
Yeah, love it. And going on to finance, banking, government, all these companies. So I had a chat actually recently with a government organization who cannot use AI, and they're building their own for privacy reasons. And same will go with people. You talked about data. What do you recommend and where to start or what to do in those scenarios?
Where the banks and our government are building their own.
Yeah, I guess more in from the perspective of you're not able to use it in your role, and how do you actually go about it? Do you avoid it totally? How can you pitch it to management?
Right. So I would imagine that management, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I imagine management is coming to you and asking you to build AI experiences. um, as much as, you might not be allowed to use those features. I think being able to kind of use those as a reference for competitive analysis, like I think something I've enjoyed doing is kind of, in my downtime, kind of testing out a lot of these AI experiences. So I kind of understand how they work. Especially ones that I can't necessarily use in my own role. But if management isn't coming to you, I think talking to whoever's, you know, who you report to about kind of maybe embedding some of this. I think it depends on the scale of company you work at. Obviously, I think if you work in like a big government agency, those decisions might not be up to you. But I would be shocked if management wasn't thinking about how they can start to create these experiences, because I think this feels like the big token topic of like how do we excite the shareholders and how do we kind of get on the front of the Times and things like that. So
Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. And how do you conduct research at a level when you're trying to build for AI? Like, how do you actually get feedback when you're building something brand new?
yeah, so I think if you're starting from scratch, I think kind of a little bit of what I was going to with what problems are you trying to solve. So I think just saying you want to build an AI experience is great, but I think going in just like feeling like you want to create an AI experience versus having problems that you think could be solved by AI are two different situations. And I think, for example, if you want to build like a chatbot experience, understanding what problems would that be solving and what solutions is it really providing, and making sure you're validating with your users, like, is this something you actually want? Is it something you're actually going to use? Versus having certain problems that you want solved and seeing how AI can kind of fit in a solution. I think these are two different roadmaps, but I think both are equally valid, but making sure that you're in touch with your users and you have a good idea of how they want it to look and how they want it to function and what they're actually looking for. Because like chatbot is such a broad topic, but kind of seeing like what niche is this filling, what need is this serving, I think is the critical questions you need to start asking yourself before even going into the research process.
Yeah, and that's a really nice follow through from your talk. It's what is the need and the purpose, and how do you prioritize potentially? So how do you actually find through what is the need? And it might be a nice segue simply to Danway's opportunity solution trees, just mapping it out.
Yeah.
No, that was really fantastic. Thank you. And a standard question that I ask, what blogs and resources do you use to stay on top of things?
Actually, when you asked Danway, like I knew I had some, but then I like went back to kind of like see what I use. Like I just like see them, and I don't actually like log what I'm reading.
Yeah.
But I do follow the Medium like UX design thread that, and they send out like really great newsletters. I do also get the emails from UXDX. Rory's in my inbox all the time. And on LinkedIn, I really like following certain like influencers in the space. So for research, I really like Aona Yang. She does a lot of YouTube videos on kind of UX research, how she got into it, methodologies, things like that. But in general, I just like to, if I see someone who's putting out really good content on LinkedIn, I will follow them. And usually they're kind of posting interesting thought pieces about how to conduct research and different things that I hadn't thought about from interesting new lenses. So I think that's something that I really like doing.
Yeah, love it. That's really nice. Thank you for that. And then what tools do you use to help you in your work?
Yeah, I use Figma on my own. So I worked a lot in a contract roles. So I think in a contract capacity, I use Miro. I really like Miro. I like Figma, FigJam. I have, yeah, I think that's the majority. I think Figma is a big one always. Just like Figma, FigJam. Like I think there's just so many options to kind of be creative with that. But I do really like Miro.
Yeah. No, that Miro is great. They're all really great options. Thank you so much, Priyanka. Really, really value that. And I know other people will. And it was really nice, logical run through. So thank you so much. Really, really great. We will see you next time and keep in touch.
All right. Thanks so much.